So this is a little platform GPS mount that sits right above the instrument cluster. There's a little platform there, and it would be right below the bar that is attached to the mechanism that raises and lowers the windshield. So the reason I wanted to go this route instead of mounting it on the bar that's already on the bike is every time you raise and lower the windshield, it raises and lowers the GPS. And of course, when you raise it, then it gets the GPS kind of up in your field of vision a little bit. And I just wanted to keep the GPS as low as possible. I have a Garmin Zumo XT. There's two companion components you also need to mount a GPS, at least with most Garmin GPSs. So I have the Zumo XT mounting plate. The GPS just pops into place and this little latch keeps it in position, locks it to the plate. And then also there's the Garmin wiring harness. The wiring harness is separate from the plate and is actually installed from the back, and you have to install that wire harness before you mount this to your plate, which mounts to the bar. So we actually have another component back here, this little plate, that is separate, and that is specific to mount to a given size or diameter bar back here. So I have the wiring harness routed down behind the instrument panel. It's right here, and I'll show how that's routed later on in this video. The other accessory that I ordered along with this, it's a separate kit, but it lets you mount the Garmin amps mounting plate for the Zumo XT to this bar. So we have a bunch of different holes depending on which size you have. As far as the GPS goes, will orient or will dictate where you mount this, either up or down or whatever. It just depends on how you want your GPS arranged. So I kind of need to get all of this stuff mounted to the bike, get this mounted, and figure that all out. So I'll end up mounting this, probably end up having to take the windshield off to do everything else. Before I install this, I'm actually going to take everything apart and put some blue thread lock on all of the hardware. This is a pretty unique design here. Once everything is installed and your GPS is mounted, this bar cannot rotate because it's machined with a little hex arrangement on the end of this bar, and then that fits into a hex receptacle here. So that's really a unique feature of this. For this, I think I'll use some of my glue stick style thread lock. The hardware is different lengths. We have two short screws, actually we've got 4 short screws that hold the uprights to the base plate, and the 2 longer screws hold the bar to the uprights. So I'm just going to take 2 of the bottom screws out at a time so I don't have to fumble with reassembling the entire thing, because it would fall apart if I took everything apart all at once. Now we'll go ahead and finish up everything else here. The Garmin amps plate needs to be mounted to this plate first. So this is all of the hardware that came with the Garmin amps mounting plate. Here's a screwdriver that's used to mount the wire harness and plug into the amps plate. The Garmin kit comes with this. So I'm using this screwdriver as a little tool to push these little I guess they're grommets or spacers into the rubber grommets inside here. So the grommets do try to push out a little bit, so you just kind of have to manipulate it and wiggle it back and forth just a little bit like that. So we're going to go ahead and do the same trick with some thread lock on all of these screws. Yeah, I guess it's kind of redundant to put thread lock on those because the screws go through far enough where we can still use the lock nuts that came with the Garmin kit. 7mm socket on the back. This is actually going to be kind of tricky since those are threaded. We just kind of need to hold the screwdriver and then manipulate the socket and ratchet to tighten the nuts. Installing this GPS mount is super easy to do. Just remove these 2 screws. The GPS mount does come with new screws that are just a little bit longer. This top plate has little recessed areas in it, and this is pretty nice how this is formed in a way and machined where it's got little protrusions that drop down into those recessed spots. We'll go ahead and put some thread lock on these screws too. And then I also put Loctite on these 2 screws. The screws that came with this mount, they were too long, so I did have to go to the hardware store and get shorter ones. What ended up happening was one of these screws, the bottom one, ended up pushing up against the wiring connector on the amps mount because it extended beyond this plate and pushed up against the wire. So once I got that fixed, then everything is ready to go. The process of installing and routing the wiring for the GPS and doing the mount for my Garmin Zumo XT has been a little bit more involved than I anticipated. So the Zumo XT wiring, and probably the Zumo XT2, has this big power adapter. So initially how I had everything routed is I had assembled everything here. I didn't mount it to the bar yet. And then I routed this wire down here through the hole where the wiring goes for the gauges. I ended up having to pull the gauge cluster off to get this little box down through here, and then I fished all of this down below where the turn signal wiring is and the auxiliary port. Well, you've got 2 vertical rods here that are sliding rods that the windshield raises and lowers on. And those rods have grease on them. And I tried to bundle up all of this wire, and I had so much of it, plus you have that little box to deal with. I didn't think that there was going to be a really good way to secure that and keep it in place up here behind the gauge cluster, because it's just going to get in the way and rub up against those 2 rods. So what I would recommend doing before you assemble your wiring harness to the amps mount is take just the wire that has the little tiny vertical connector on it, stuff that up from below up through the top, then install the wiring to the amps mount. Then you can take all of this extra wire here and secure it back here behind the side panel where the turn signal and auxiliary wiring is. And you can use zip ties to secure everything, because there's a lot more space to secure stuff back here than there is back here. Plus you don't have to worry about the wiring rubbing against those rods with grease on them and all of that good stuff. So what we're going to do next is connect this to the auxiliary wiring back here, which it's hiding. Here it is right here. Once you get the side panels off and the turn signal disconnected, then taped up to the turn signal lead, you'll find 2 other wires. On my particular bike, and you can see here I've got some leads taped in there. I'm just doing that for the purpose of this video. But I have a green wire and a red wire. The red wire on my bike is positive and the black is negative. So I just tape those in there as a method of holding them in place while I can take a look at the voltmeter. And I would definitely highly recommend checking your bike before you make this connection. So that's confirming that red is positive, green is negative. So we've got 12.45 volts. Looking under the seat, we see all of the electrical stuff. So right here in the middle, between this connector and this little relay box, we have a little tiny fuse panel. So I've labeled these. So there's got positions for 3 fuses in here. We have one that I'm not sure what it goes to, and then I labeled this one the middle for the rear auxiliary power connector, and then this one is the front. And then we can see the fuses underneath. So we have a 7, a 5, and a 7. And these are actually labeled inside too. I didn't actually notice that before. So this front one is actually a spare fuse. And this label in here is backwards. It's essentially reading as if you're looking at the orientation like that. So the rear power connector is right here. And I have this set up to trigger power to this Tusk auxiliary power block, and I have wiring for all of that routed up to the front of the bike, which I'll show in a later video, which will also be linked down in the description below. Here's what it looks like with the GPS installed. So we're going to go ahead and turn on the GPS, and you can see I have probably 3/8 of an inch or so, maybe not quite half an inch. And the way I have the mounting plate mounted to the bar is I'm using the lower set of holes in the mounting plate. That gives me the ability to have the GPS just a little bit higher above the instrument panel. That way I had more flexibility in adjusting the angle of the GPS for proper viewing for my height. So that is really going to work well.